Welcome back to WNBA Updates, your home for the most complete and in-depth coverage of everything happening in the league. Tonight, we are breaking down one of the most anticipated rematches of the 2026 WNBA season. A game that had storylines stacked on top of storylines, a furious comeback, a physical rivalry reignited, and a final score that has major implications for the Eastern Conference standings. We are talking about the Atlanta Dream taking down the Indiana Fever, 108-101, in a game that was every bit as intense and dramatic as anyone could have hoped for. So grab your seat, because there is a lot to unpack here. Before we even tip off, let's talk about the context, because context matters enormously when it comes to these two teams meeting on the floor. You cannot talk about this matchup without talking about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. These two players have been linked together since that unforgettable 2023 college game that captured the entire country's attention. Since then, their careers have run almost parallel, both entering the professional ranks, both becoming marquee names in the WNBA, and both carrying the kind of star power that elevates the entire league's profile. When Reese made the move to Atlanta this past offseason, everyone knew exactly what it meant. The rivalry had a brand new chapter, and the basketball world was watching closely. The two teams had already met once earlier in the 2026 season, back on June 4th, with Indiana coming away with the victory, 83-71. That game was largely driven by Mitchell's explosion on the offensive end, while Reese put together a solid double-double performance of 11 points and 10 rebounds in a losing effort for the Dream. Atlanta felt that one, and you could bet they came into this Thursday night rematch at Gainbridge Fieldhouse with something to prove. Now let's talk about where both teams stood coming into this game, because both rosters were genuinely rolling. Indiana came in carrying some serious momentum. The Fever were 9-5 on the season, winners of 4 consecutive games, and they had just put up massive offensive numbers, 114 points against Chicago in overtime, followed by 113 against Toronto just 2 nights later. That is an offense that is clicking on all cylinders. Clark and Mitchell were both averaging better than 20 points per night, which is a terrifying combination for any defense in this league to deal with. And then you add Sophie Cunningham into the mix, who had quietly become one of the most lethal role players in the entire WNBA, shooting above 43% from three-point range on the season. Indiana was not just winning, they were winning convincingly and in style. Atlanta was no slouch either. The Dream came in at 9-4, winners in 3 of their last 4, and had just delivered a dominant defensive performance against Toronto, holding them to under 80 points in a 102-77 blowout victory. This was a team playing with structure, confidence, and balance. All 5 of their starters were capable of going off on any given night, and their defense had the kind of edge that makes late-game situations very difficult for opponents. This was, on paper, a genuinely even matchup between 2 of the East's best teams. On the floor, it delivered exactly what the billing promised. The game opened with both teams feeling each other out, but it did not stay quiet for long. Howard got Atlanta on the board first, missing an early 3 but having the presence of mind to chase down her own rebound and finish with a driving layup. That kind of hustle set the tone for how the Dream would operate all night. Indiana responded quickly. Hull tied things up off a Clark assist, and from there the quarter turned into an absolute back-and-forth exchange. Canada buried a 3 off a Reese dish to give Atlanta the edge, but then stole the ball away from Clark on the very next defensive possession and turned it into more Atlanta offense. A reverse layup from Reese that showed off both her tenacity and her ability to finish in traffic. Clark answered, as Clark tends to do, with a smooth finger roll to keep Indiana in the conversation. The teams kept trading punches throughout the first quarter. Billings knocked down a layup off another Clark assist. Reese made one of 2 from the free throw line. Clark drilled a 3 off a Billings setup to put Indiana in front. Gray responded with a driving layup to swing it back to Atlanta. Boston tied it once again. By the end of the first quarter, Indiana had managed to edge ahead and looked sharp doing it. Clark was already distributing, Mitchell was involved, and Cunningham had already shown her shooting threat. Atlanta was competing, but Indiana held the early lead and looked like the team with a little more pop to start. The second quarter is where this game truly came alive, and not just because of the basketball being played. The scoring continued at a high pace with both teams refusing to let the other pull away. Howard connected on a transition pull-up 3 to tie things. Canada answered with a finger roll to push Atlanta back in front. It was the kind of quarter where neither team could build any breathing room. And then came the moment that everyone is going to be talking about. Clark drove into contact and drew a foul call after being shoved by Reese. Standard enough in a physical rivalry game, but Reese, being Reese, clapped back in her trademark fashion, mocking Clark's reaction to the contact, suggesting she had sold the call. The crowd responded. Both benches reacted. The energy in the building shifted instantly. This is the kind of moment that this rivalry produces, and it is the kind of moment that sells tickets and fills highlight reels. What did Clark do? She answered on the floor. She stepped back and knocked down a jumper off a Boston assist to tie the game right back up. That is the version of Caitlin Clark that makes Indiana so dangerous. She does not get rattled, she gets focused. The rest of the second quarter was a wild ride. Cunningham buried a three to tie it at one point. Howard's driving layup pushed Atlanta back on top. Cunningham came back with a steal and score layup to put Indiana ahead again. Atlanta pushed back. Gray hit a three-point play. Canada had a steal and score of her own. Boston hit a three. The lead flipped multiple times in the span of just a few minutes, and neither team was able to hold any margin for more than a possession or two. By halftime, Atlanta had managed to claw out a lead, with Canada's free throws giving the Dream the edge heading into the locker room. It was tight, it was physical, and both teams knew the real game was still to come. The third quarter is where the Dream began to truly take control of this game, and they did it through a combination of individual brilliance and genuine team depth. Indiana actually opened the second half with some momentum. Boston hit a driving layup to cut into the Atlanta lead right away, and it looked briefly like the Fever might flip the script. But the Dream had other ideas. Gray was absolutely dominant in this quarter. She hit a steal and score layup and converted a free throw to push the lead back out, and her ability to make things happen in transition gave Atlanta an advantage that Indiana could not consistently answer. Mitchell did his best to keep Indiana within reach. His floater, a Clark running layup, and eventually a three off Clark's seventh assist of the night all helped trim the deficit at various points. But every time Indiana got close, Atlanta had an answer. Hillman was excellent in this quarter as well, scoring at key moments and extending the lead repeatedly. Pow Pow hit a three off a Howard assist that was one of the biggest buckets of the third quarter. Howard had back-to-back driving scores that extended Atlanta's advantage out to their largest margin of the entire night. A 17-point lead that suddenly made this game look much more one-sided than the first half had suggested. Clark continued to facilitate throughout all of this, reaching 7 assists in the third quarter alone. But the Dream's collective defense made life difficult enough that Indiana could not sustain any significant scoring runs. Atlanta entered the fourth quarter with a 9-point lead, and the way they had been playing, it felt like it might be more than enough. Here is where this game became truly special, and here is where Mitchell's individual performance reached another level entirely. Indiana came out in the fourth quarter with nothing to lose and everything to prove. They were down 9, their 4-game winning streak was on the line, and their marquee players were going to have to step up in a major way. And they did. Mitchell was stunning down the stretch, scoring repeatedly and pulling Indiana all the way back into the game. Boston was steady and physical, converting in the paint and at the free throw line. Atlanta's lead, which had been as large as 17, began evaporating possession by possession. The Fever were doing what good teams do. They kept competing, kept attacking, and refused to let the game get away from them. Cunningham's reverse layup off a Harris assist tied the game with just over 5 minutes remaining, and the entire atmosphere at Gainbridge Fieldhouse shifted completely. What looked like a comfortable Atlanta victory had suddenly become anyone's game. Indiana had pulled off the comeback of the night, and the crowd was fully alive. But this is where Atlanta showed exactly what kind of team they are in 2026. Reese answered immediately with a driving layup to put Atlanta back in front. Mitchell tied it once more with a floater off a Cunningham assist, and for a brief moment it felt like Indiana might actually complete the comeback and win this thing. But Gray hit her free throws, Canada came up with a steal and converted it into easy points, and just like that, Atlanta had breathing room again. Every time Indiana thought they had found their way back, the Dream had a response. Howard was exceptional in these final minutes, scoring on 2 separate driving buckets when Atlanta needed them most. The Fever did too little too late, and when the final buzzer sounded, Atlanta had closed it out, 108-101. This game told us a lot about both teams. Atlanta is deep, balanced, and built for the long haul. Having all 5 starters score in double figures is not something that happens by accident. That is the product of a team that trusts one another, moves the ball, and does not rely too heavily on any single player to carry the load. Howard's fourth quarter performance was clutch. Gray's third quarter dominance was the turning point, and Reese, physical and opportunistic from start to finish, showed exactly why Atlanta wanted her on this roster. For Indiana, there are plenty of positives despite the loss. Mitchell was magnificent. Boston was a stabilizing presence on both ends. And Clark, despite not having her best shooting night, orchestrated Indiana's comeback attempt with her usual intelligence and poise. The issue is that Atlanta's depth is genuinely difficult to overcome when it is firing on all cylinders. The series between these two teams is now even. Indiana won round 1, Atlanta won round 2. And the next chapter is coming fast. These two teams are scheduled to meet again in Atlanta on Saturday, and after everything that happened Thursday night, that game cannot come soon enough. Indiana falls to 9-6. Atlanta rises to 10-4 and keeps climbing toward the top of the Eastern Conference. And the Commissioner's Cup race? It just got a whole lot more interesting. We will have full coverage of the next meeting right here on WNBA Updates, so make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you do not miss a single second of it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you have winning the rubber match in Atlanta? Until next time, we will catch you on the next one.